Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to you. My name is Emma, and I'm the founder and managing director at Chief Disruptor. We're delighted you're tuning in for the second episode in this series exploring the trends shaping the future of flexible working. This series is about how innovative small and medium-sized businesses are embracing a flexibility-first world and empowering employees to work from anywhere. Over the course of the 6 episodes, our guest speakers will delve into how they are rewriting the rules on how to work, not only to survive, but also to thrive. In this episode, we're speaking with leaders from businesses that are challenging industry norms and delighting customers while they do it. As part of today's discussion, we're hearing from leaders at the helm of challenger brands who are bringing their teams together to disrupt traditional business models. So what exactly do we mean by disruption? Disruptive innovation was first coined by Clayton Christensen in 1995 to describe the process of technological innovation, transforming business models and allowing market entrants to seize a market share and thus transform an industry. Today, we're hearing from leaders who certainly live up to this definition. But before we delve into their experience of disruption, I'd like to start with a round of introductions. Today, we'll be hearing from Paul, Simon, and from Jen. And I'm going to hand over to each of our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us about their roles. I'd like to start with Paul.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you very much for inviting me on the podcast. It's great to be here. So I'm Paul Trotter. Got 3 kids. I've got 2 dogs, and I've got a beautiful wife. In terms of at Atom Bank, I've been there pretty much from the beginning. Initially working for a third-party supplier, one of the key suppliers, as the program manager for the initial bank that was deployed and implemented, and then I joined directly, where I've taken on a number of roles. I think in these type of companies, as they evolve, your role changes and things like that. So I've done everything from head of change, head of service delivery, and currently I'm the head of IT delivery. And as part of that as well, I've been the deputy CTO for the last 3 years.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Jen.
Hi, thanks, Emma. Yeah, it's great to be here today with you all. So I'm Senior Director of EMEA Marketing at GoTo. I've worked for tech companies, primarily SaaS organizations, since coming out of university. I'm not going to tell you how many years that is. I'm married to a great guy called Jay. We've got 2 children. I've got no pets because 2 children is enough for us. And yeah, based out of Surrey.
Thank you so much. And Simon, to you.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for having me. So I'm Simon, founder and CEO of Modern Milkman. Grew up in the food and farming industry. I suppose to follow suit everyone else. Got a missus and 3 kids, 2 horses, a dog, a few pigs, a couple of rabbits, just about everything else in the world that we need to take care of. Started Modern Milkman in 2018. It grew from the idea from off David Attenborough, so Watch the Blue Planet, saw the issues around single-use plastic in the food supply chains, and recognised the milk round and questioned why, an industry that fixed a lot of problems had sort of died away. So went and bought a milk round, and here we are today.
Thank you so much, Simon. Great end to the introductions. Thank you indeed. We're going to come into the first part of this, which is looking at disruptive business models. And over the last 5 years, we've been serving our community of disruptive business and technology leaders as part of our Disruptive Trends survey, and thus the report. Since 2018, the percentage of respondents describing their place of work as a disruptor has increased by 21%. And in 2022, for the first time, the majority of our respondents agreed their organisation was disruptive. So in a world of disruptors, how do you stand out? Jen, from your experience, how are organisations being disrupted?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I think to pick up on what you're saying, it does come down to the place of work. And I think one of the areas that I've seen the biggest disruption, both in companies that GoTo works with and in the organizations that I choose to buy from as a consumer, is customer service. That customer service can now be offered from anywhere. When we think about a traditional contact center, like that stock image of people sat in a row with headsets on comes to mind. But actually, organisations are now supporting flexible working for the people that look after their service to their customers. So I think that's pretty disruptive, and now actually that's one of the expectations, is that they can serve customers from anywhere. They don't need to go into an office 5-6 days a week.
And Paul, being at a bank for such a long time, what does disruption look like for you as a challenger bank? And also, what role has technology played in enabling disruption?
So banking is it should be an enabler, and in terms of what people are looking for. No one almost wants to bank. That's not the reason they're doing it. They're saving for something, or they are actually lending some money because they're buying a house or whatever else it might be. So you're part of someone's journey, and that's what's really important for a bank to actually realize, is actually how do you make that as smooth and efficient as possible, so that it's buying a house, very, very stressful thing to be doing. How do you actually enable it so that actually where you do fall out of the standard process, it's slick, it's smooth, and you're speaking to a human so that they can understand and they can empathize and work with you on it. And where you don't need to fall out, how quick can you do it? So like the quickest we could do it is under a minute, all the way from an application all the way through to an offer. And so that actually it's taken the pain completely away. So for me, it's all around then, how do you scale that and how do you empower and self-serve the customer? Because no one really wants to talk to the bank. If they are talking to you, generally something's gone wrong. So it's like, how do you actually empower them to actually do their own thing to actually achieve the goals that they're after?
Absolutely, thank you. Simon, the modern Milkman is also described as a purpose-driven business. What does that mean for you, and what's the link between purpose and disruption?
Yeah, so I think in terms of purpose, back to the point around David Attenborough, we set the business up to reduce waste. So I think the mission began around plastic waste and packaging waste, but then we quickly realised as we got on the journey that there's a much bigger challenge that sits behind that, which is food waste. And I think we all hear the term 25 to 30% of food produced is wasted, but actually around 75% of that is wasted in the household, not necessarily in the supply chain. So the mission for us is about reducing that, and supporting the consumer through use of technology to do that. So by delivering little and often orders and subscribing them into products and ranges, that helps and supports them to do that. So I think that's how we think about the mission, and I think that's disrupting in two ways. One is disrupting the grocery supply chain. So you're trying to remove the the consumerism, if you will, of big purchases, big basket shopping, and movement to little and often. But then also, I think one of the big things we saw out the back of COVID was that the value proposition to the employee has changed a lot. We're not mercenaries anymore. We're not 100% focused on salary. We want a bigger offering. We want to feel like we're having a positive impact, and the work we do is going to a greater good, and not just about making as much money as possible. And I think that's really disrupted the way that recruitment works, and really helped us as a business to bring in really good people, because it's quite attractive to work for something that's doing good.
Absolutely. Paul, what have you seen, looking at purpose, looking at the customers, looking at technology and so on? What have you been experiencing?
So in terms of purpose, a lot of what Simon just said resonates. If you think around actually the whole employee value proposition, it's become a far more challenging thing around how do you retain people, how do you actually keep them motivated and driven, and it definitely isn't purely about cash. And that just motivates for a very short period of time, and there's certain levels where that just starts to fade away. And so it's kind of like, actually, what's the outcome that you're achieving? People want to know that they're doing something, they're working hard to achieve something. So how does that come back? So in our case, does it come back to store ratings? Does that come back through less propensity to contact in the contact center? How actually are people responding, whether it might be Trustpilot as well, that type of thing. But then as well, from a employee perspective, there's things like, in terms of we've offering things like 4-day week, but that's not for everybody, because actually there is no one type fits all. It kind of one type generally fits nobody rather than anything else. So it's kind of, you've got to offer different things to different people. What a technologist might want is very, very different to what somebody in ops might want, because potentially they're just at different spaces in their life, or whatever else it might be, in terms of just general interests, in terms of and the types of way in which they would go about thinking. So in terms of the overall business, you need to do the right thing by your customer, do the right thing by your employees, and certainly if you do the right thing by your employees and that you keep them motivated, and therefore they want to stay and they want to build because they understand what that North Star and that goal is, you end up with happier customers anyway.
And Jen, you've seen a huge amount over the last 2 years, and obviously over all of your years prior to what's been going on globally. What are your thoughts there on that purpose?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I was going to add to what Simon was saying there. I think for me, disruption without purpose has the ability to create chaos, which is not great for any business rhythm, whatever your business KPIs are. But I think it's really interesting to me how prevalent the link is between sustainability and flexibility. And that though, though very much those things go hand in hand. And so now, at GoTo, if we travel with purpose. We travel to meet and collaborate to further a particular business goal. We don't travel because somebody's telling us that we need to go to a particular place of work every single day of the week. So, like Paul was saying, one choice fits no one.
Absolutely. I'd love to delve a little bit more into that flexible working. As senior leaders, how do you go about forming and rolling out your approach to flexible working? And what were your top considerations? Paul, I'm going to come to you, so I know you've mentioned those 4 days a week.
You speak to your employees first of all, especially with everything that everyone's been going through in recent years. Frankly, we've had Brexit, we've got COVID, we've now got a war that's taking place that's is impacting people. We've got staff who in Poland, so they're massively impacted in the sense of, and it's very conscious on their mind. So effectively, it's not just, oh, we do a 4-day week, let's now take our foot off the pedals because everyone should automatically be happy. It's kind of, what else do we do and what else do we need to do? We need to continue to evolve our proposition so it stays relevant, and it's relevant to all, and everyone therefore is actually working towards that overall goal. As I mentioned, 4-day week itself and what we've seen in the last year, as well as some of the other things that we've done, has led to a double-digit improvement in our employee engagement scores. So they're now in the 80%, which is amazing, and actually happy employees, like I say, just flows through, not just to the customers in terms of when people contact the contact center, but also through the technology department, and it encourages people to want to be collaborative and everything else. But there's extra things that we all need to do, which is things like, for us, it's hackathons and that type of stuff, because that's what's going to get people interested, because it gives them chances to be innovative. But at the same time, you've then got to implement those ideas. You can't just go, let's have a hackathon and give out some free gear. It's kind of got to, what you do on top of that to keep on building on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to see those results coming through in the 80%. Simon, from your perspective, what were your top considerations and how are you rolling out that approach to flexible working?
So we still had to learn on the fly with this. I think when COVID kicked in, I think we had 6 or 8 employees. And then obviously COVID turbocharged our growth. So we had to sort of learn to recruit virtually, learn to onboard virtually, learn to work and adapt and work with people virtually. So we very much learned on the fly. I think for me, it's always been about an approach of giving trust rather than making people earn trust. And I think, there's quite an old-fashioned way in managing people that or a thought process of people must earn trust to therefore be given it, which is completely upside down and not empowering at all for a person. So if you take the mantra of giving trust and focusing on outputs, not on inputs, I think quite quickly you build a sort of an organizational sort of mantra of people wanting to do the right thing, people wanting to do what's needed. I think the other side of that from a manager's perspective is you just need to give real clear direction, real clear expectations, and really set out a vision and goals. I think as long as you're doing those things, it works pretty well from my perspective.
Thank you so much indeed. Would you say your company cultures have changed since you moved to a flexible working environment? And if so, in what ways? Paul, can I come to you on that company culture being sort of so pivotal?
Culture at Atom's always been very open, honest, and it's always had generally been centered around the actual head office, because we're all in one location. Pre-COVID we were. So in terms of how do you then do that when you're doing it, keep that when you're going remote, that was initially a challenge for sure, especially as we then went and opened up a second office in Krakow in Poland. And how do people in the Northeast feel about that? And in that sense, in terms of us being a Northeast-based bank, so the culture has been, it's definitely been a challenge. But how do we maintain it? How do we do it? we have relevant touch points. So we don't, a bit like Jen said, you don't force someone to travel just because we want to see you. We encourage people to travel for having a good reason, even if that is a social, because people work with people, or if it is things like a hackathon or other things in smaller groups for people to be able to get together. During the COVID as well, we didn't even say you had to come to the office, but we would encourage people to go and meet, whether that be in a Starbucks or a Costa, just so that they could just keep together and see each other. I think the key challenge around the culture for us is around how do you maintain that on the onboarding process. So people who join the company, and culture is a huge part of our interview process to make certain the fit is that, you know, we're going to keep and maintain it. How do you do that in terms of on the onboarding? So getting people in there, not just so it feels like a smooth one, so the pass is there, the computer's there, but also so that they're meeting people. That can be virtual, that can be in lots of different ways, but so that they feel like they're understanding what they're joining and why they're joining, rather than I'm now just about to go and do some coding and here's a spec for me to go and work against. Because you've got to be careful that, particularly in a more flexible or a hybrid or whatever, and people don't become, it just becomes a transaction. Actually, you're maintaining the culture so that everyone's still proud and keeping on going. And from our scores perspective, when we're talking to our employees, we've definitely managed to achieve that. So that which is really positive for us.
Thank you so much. Jen and Simon, from your perspectives, have you seen some changes when it comes to culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think further to what Paul was saying about a 4-day week, GoTo offers self-care days once a month on the first Friday of every month, and that is really cherished by the organisation and celebrated. So it becomes part of our culture. So, you know, we'll actually share photographs of how we made the most of that self-care day. You know, for me, sometimes it can just be the beauty of being able to travel and pick my son up for school, you know, and just that break in routine is really refreshing and appreciated, and actually really helps with what can be the downside of flexible working, which is passionate, motivated people working long hours. You know, so yes, we don't have necessarily, unless we choose to, we don't have that commuting time, you know, so our structures are not rigid, but actually that can have a downside, and that before you know it, it's 7 o'clock in the evening and you're still working because you got caught up in something. So as an organisation, as managers and leaders within our business, we're really conscious of that, and making sure that family and health and that downtime is as, if not even more important than their time at work.
Thank you. Simon, obviously you've had significant growth in the last couple of years in particular. How has that affected company culture for you?
I think, yeah, good question. It's really difficult to sort of control the outputs in respect of working hours. So I think, to Jen's point, the biggest challenge I've seen with remote working is that because you're giving people flexibility, they actually give a lot more for that because they really value it, and therefore their output and energy for the business is really strong. But that can be quite dangerous because you end up with people overworking, burnout becomes a bigger challenge. So I think as you're scaling quickly, onboarding people, bringing them into the culture of this, and then if there's this high pace output culture, it's quite challenging for new entrants because they come into a business that's at, you know, rocket pace and everyone's working really hard, and they feel psychologically that they have to jump on and get on board with that, and that's definitely not the case, and you've got to try and fight against it. So I think that's been one of the biggest challenges for us. I think the other side of it is it's really difficult to understand how someone's getting on when you're working remotely. So, like, you know, are they struggling with anything? Have they got mental health issues or work issues? Do they have enough information? And if somebody's not quite outgoing and wants to go and communicate, it's quite difficult for them to then air those problems and voice that. So we've been trying to build channels where people can, or buddy schemes. So when people are onboarding and coming into the business, if they've got challenges, they've got someone they can go to and voice them with. And I think that was one of our key learnings in the early days, is onboarding is really difficult in a remote culture. And it's trying to find ways where people can feel like they've got a voice or feel like they can speak to someone and air challenges.
Thank you so much. I think as we are all entering this beta phase of flexible working, there are some real challenges, aren't there, as well as some real wins. And I think you've all covered some of those in terms of what we need to be thinking about and so on. I'm going to ask you, as senior leaders, what have been your experiences when it comes to leading teams in this way? How do you approach inspiring and motivating your teams in a flexible working world? It's a big, big challenge and a big project for all of you. Paul, how have you approached that?
Largely, in terms of motivation of the teams, we've cut down meetings. That's actually been probably the most important things, because being in front of a screen is just really hard, and actually getting the interaction while on the screen is almost everyone, especially if it's a bigger group, it starts to become becomes very stale and everyone stays quiet. So actually, how do you motivate and drive and lead the people? It's actually through little and often. So, and it's basically every day, do a lot more stand-ups, but you make them 15 minutes, do a lot more general conversations, just in terms of chats, whether that be Teams, whether that be actually consciously trying to pick up the phone rather than actually just going and sending emails, which we may have done in the past. So it's basically, as much as possible, you've got to sort of look out for little signs that someone's struggling, because you can't necessarily see it in the same way as you would. So as someone put the camera on, or who never normally has the camera on, or actually you see different surroundings and that type of thing, it's kind of awareness. But it's the main challenge on the whole thing is how do you is just basically keeping it very, very frequent, and just to keep people going. And also the other thing around leading is you've just got to be open and honest. People think you've got to wait until you've got the big answer and it's some grand plan, but actually just saying, I'm working on it and this is the direction I'm thinking we're going, and giving them an ability to respond on, particularly in these unsettling times, that for me is really, really key. Just being open, honest, and just straight with the people.
Thank you so much. Jen, inspiring obviously is incredibly difficult and motivating. How have you approached that in the last couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, I'm picking up on what both Simon and Paul have said. It's about finding the right communication method for the right conversation. So I agree with Paul. You get too many people on a video conference and nobody will speak. So it's really, really important. I'll use messages just if I want to share, a couple of thoughts of appreciation. I'll use messages, or I even use gifts along with it to add some lightheartedness to it. And I think as well as choosing the right comms for the right conversation, it's also about being real. So Jen Brown doesn't begin and end with GoTo. There are days where something might happen that is great, or something might happen that's bad outside of my work life, and I'm real about that. So if I've had a really, really really bad couple of days for whatever reason, then I won't burden my team with it, but I'll be honest with them that I've got something going on. And I think that's a big cultural shift. That kind of like always on professional persona that is so socially draining. I think through the pandemic and beyond, we've definitely seen that begin to ebb away. And I really appreciate that, because it's really hard being anything other than our actual selves.
Just to build on that, I think it's really important that as leaders, you show that you're being flexible as well, and that you're taking advantage of it. So your child might just have rugby or something else after school, or like mine has music lessons, and then being able to go and take them to that just means so much to you. But if you actually let everybody else know that you're doing it, it almost gives them the authority to be able to go and do that themselves, rather than them feeling like they have to be penned to their desks and everything else. So I absolutely 100% agree with you, and it's really important as a leader that you show all the human side, so that they know actually everything's okay in that way.
Absolutely. Simon, some thoughts from you, particularly you've just started to expand and so on. Any final thoughts on that approach and also that inspiration for others?
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. Like, we make a conscious effort of like blocking diary time out for going to the gym and things like that. To Paul's point, to make it visible as a senior leader that it's okay to do those sort of things. I think the big thing for me is it's really difficult to get to know somebody through a screen. So like we as a senior team in our business try and make a conscious effort to meet in person, at least once a month. I make a conscious effort to try and travel, to meet people for one-to-ones, rather than just always being in a digital landscape. And I think that's helped a lot, because then you physically get to know someone. To Jen's point, everyone has physical challenges, whether it's work related or home related. And to work with somebody well, you really need to understand them as a person. So that's what's worked well for me.
Thank you. And I'd love to move on now into how you're growing and scaling and pivoting as disruptive businesses. Obviously, GoTo, Atom Bank, and the Modern Milkman have all grown and done this, but they also serve different customers. But ultimately, all three businesses are all about helping customers feel good about convenience. How have you maintained this level of service and responsiveness to customers while also allowing for flexible working? And what role has tech played in that? Can I come to you, Simon, on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, it's about empowerment. So the person doing that role should understand the needs of the business for them to deliver that role well. So, you know, like not every role can be 100% flexible. A customer service agent, for example, needs to have a set working hours to ensure that the customer service well. So I think, you know, every department in our business has a different level of flexibility and to service the needs of the business. But I think it's about, you know, when you recruit that role and employ that person, it's about setting the expectation from the offset and working with them on that. And that's how, you know, we're a 24-hour business, really. We deliver through the night, we service customers through the day. So everyone within our business has a different part to play to deliver the bigger vision.
Thank you. Paul, obviously Atom Bank has been around for a little bit longer, but, you know, trying to maintain that level of service and responsiveness, how are you doing that in that flexible working world that we now live in? And also, what role is tech playing?
So in terms of how do you do it, it's like Simon says, you've got to set the expectation. But you've also got to be fair to everybody. So just because you're asking a contact center person to work, not necessarily them individually, to be there 7 days a week because it needs to be, you've still got to make certain they still feel the benefits of the 4-day week like everybody else in the bank does. So you've got to sort of make certain that you work with them around what works for them as an area as much as anything else. In terms of technology, I mean, we got, when COVID first hit, we were able to get everybody, literally everybody, out of the building, you know, in 2 weeks, including everybody who was in the contact center. We were helped by the fact that a number of areas already made work occasionally, you know, in a bit more of a flexible way anyway. But certainly the contact center as a whole was slightly more challenging and that type of stuff. And that was largely tech in terms of how do we get a workspace up and running, and how do you actually provide the right kit for everybody so that they've got the same same capabilities at home, then rather than they're suddenly working on a 14-inch monitor rather than a 24-inch one and having 2 screens and everything else. But also whilst recognizing that they might not want those things permanently spaced there because actually their house probably wasn't designed, you know, to have them working at home permanently anyway. And certainly in our contact center previously, we would have been sharing kit because of the shift patterns and everything else. So in terms of how do you do it while doing it flexibly, again, it's kind of what matters to those people in terms of some people may want to work more nights or evenings, others may actually be happier to work on the weekends. But it's around how did that team as a whole know what the end goal is and then work with them to be able to go and achieve it overall.
Thank you. Jen, does any of that resonate for you from a personal standpoint?
Yeah, it does. It resonates from a personal standpoint, and it resonates from some research that GoTo commissioned with Frost and Sullivan recently, and it was focused on the need to invest and provide further support and enablement for IT teams. Like, they need support to be supportive, and actually a staggering 76% of those respondents had confirmed that they needed to increase support because of the IT workload to support flexible, and that actually 43% said it had become more difficult. So I think, you know, all of this flexible working that we're talking about works when it works, but when it doesn't work, we need to make sure that the people supporting that have the right technology and support themselves and enough resources to be able to provide that internal customer service, so that in turn individuals working through the organization are happy and equipped to work and can support their customers.
Absolutely. And looking at Atom Bank and the Modern Milkman, you've both seen incredible growth in recent years. We often hear and often see, don't we, that employee numbers grow, but also that communication lines effectiveness and efficiencies can therefore potentially decrease or be affected quite negatively. Can I come to you, Paul, to get a thought from you in terms of how do you maintain those strong lines?
So in terms of ourselves, and we've grown massively over the last 2-3 years now, and we're 450 strong in terms of people, and growing again this year. So in terms of how we do it, though, it's about having different comms at different levels, and again keeping it personal. You know, in terms of, so we'll have regular access to the CEO, to the C-suite. In terms of, we'll also have meetings at sort of slightly more junior levels, so that, and they've got ways in which they can go and speak through. I think one of the most challenging areas, though, is actually where it's almost hybrid, where it's actually easier if everyone's in the office, or it's easier if everyone's remote. It's actually, how do you keep the people who are remote engaged when everybody else is in the room, if you're doing presentations and everything else. And for us, it's also as well about how you share information. So there's no reason to hide any of our monthly figures, or in terms of whether they be ops, whether they be finance, whether they be technology ones. So again, everyone still feels like they understand why we're doing things and what it means, and therefore what it means, what difference they're making to the end goal. And you just use lots of different forum styles to be able to do that in terms of different types of cascade. But the key thing is the message being consistent, but being personal and relevant to that individual group. Again, because that's how you engage them. You know, there's people need to understand what the difference they actually individually make, and a lot of that needs to be reiterated on a daily, weekly basis in different forums.
And Simon, the Modern Milkman, I think, grew 4 times in 3 weeks when COVID struck, and obviously you've had huge amounts of growth as well. How are you developing those lines of communications? How are you keeping them strong?
I'd echo a lot of what Paul said. I think, you know, he pretty much nailed it there. I think the only addition I'd make is that we try and do like a quarterly in-person all hands, get everyone together, a few beers, share a lot of information. And I think that just helps, again, getting people together, getting them to see each other face to face, getting to mingle, just helps then all those other communication lines flow when you get into more of a virtual environment.
Absolutely. So for leaders that are listening to this today who want to scale their businesses, what advice would you have for them? Jen, can I come to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just building on what I was saying earlier. You know, scaling a business, particularly with flexible working, is of course only as strong as the IT support and the cultural support to make that happen. So, and again, building on what Paul was saying, it really comes down to ensuring that you hire the right people that have got the right cultural fit that will add to that, and that it's not just the beginning of flexible working that we've seen in the last couple of years. It's how do we maintain that, and how do we support it? And as Paul said, how do you make the people that are not in the room when others are there feel involved? I'm really fortunate that I work in an organisation where everyone's really mindful of that. So when I'm, for example, talking to a group of people that are based, you know, that are in our Boston office together, you know, members of our leadership team and our CMO are fantastic about making sure that I'm involved. And actually, we use the technology to help. You know, it always makes me smile because it feels like putting my hand up in class. But I use the raise hand button. Then I don't need to interrupt, but they see that I want to add my point. And, you know, so I think there's a degree of facilitation that needs to happen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon, what would your advice be?
I think don't overthink it. I think people are people, and, you know, think about it from your perspective. What do you want out of it? And that's the way I approach it. What do I want from a job? What do I want from this job? And if you approach it with that perspective, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, and I think that simplicity is key. Paul, any advice?
In terms of scaling your business, you can have the best business plan in the world, but if actually really everything's underpinned by people, and it's a battle for talent out there. People have lots of options now with flexible working, so it's for me largely it's around actually what's that value proposition for the employee, and then also on top of that, how do you then enable it to then go and hit your plan overall.
What a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Jen, Simon and Paul, so much for your insight. And thank you to those of you who've been watching. If you have any thoughts or questions, please do reach out to us at Chief Disruptor or our partner GoTo for some more information on any aspects of the discussion today. And be sure to catch up with more of the episodes in this series on the trends shaping the future of flexible work. So once again, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.